Welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our workshop on Organising for the Future, Accountability in the Public and Private Sector. So the workshop is organised by myself, John Ferguson from the University of St Andrews, and Michael Placek from Charles University.
Hello.
Hi Charles, or sorry, hi Michael. I'm just trying to change my slide. There we go. So the workshop itself is funded by a joint seed funding scheme between the University of St Andrews and Charles University. So the idea is really to bring together researchers from each of these institutions to see if there are opportunities for collaboration. So this project started really with the idea that it might be interesting and useful to bring together researchers from different sectors. So those who focus on the public sector or sustainability issues in the public sector and sustainability issues in the private sector. So ostensibly, really, that's bringing together researchers from Michael's institution and network that mostly focus on public sector research or sustainability issues in the public sector, and researchers from the Centre for Social and Environmental Accounting Research in St Andrews, who mostly focus on the private sector, although we do have a number of researchers who focus on the public sector as well and on NGOs. So our plan for this project is that there will be 3 workshops, and this is the first workshop. So today's workshop is really to start a conversation, to think about common themes that researchers who look at the public sector and the private sector might encounter when they're thinking about issues of sustainability. So it's really to start an informal, friendly conversation about the types of issues and themes that we consider in our work. This workshop will be followed by 2 further workshops, and the details of those will be shared with you in due course. The second workshop will be looking at challenges in methodology, and the third workshop will look at impacting practices and issues related to knowledge exchange. So we're very fortunate today that Nicole Darnell and Jan Bebbington will be speaking with us, and they're going to be focusing mostly on issues of reporting, but I think some of what they say will resonate in relation to issues related to methodology and availability of data and so on. You may recall, so many of you on the call may have completed a survey prior to this workshop. So in the build up to this workshop, we sent out a very brief survey just to start together some ideas, really, to think about areas of overlap and types of issues that we face in our different networks. So what you see in front of you is a visualization or a word cloud that's based around the responses to a particular question about, are there any themes or issues that you think are common to public sector research on sustainability and private sector research on sustainability? So you can see from that visualization that there are, some key issues that jump out. I suppose the 3 really that jump out, apart from sustainability itself, are accountability, stakeholder engagement, and reporting, which is perhaps not so much of a surprise. We can see in this slide, again, this is just some basic information, just to get a sense of whether there are any differences in themes that are coming through from researchers from different backgrounds. I think this slide would suggest that there's not a huge amount of difference, and those 3 themes, accountability, stakeholder engagement, and reporting, are fairly prevalent across researchers who are looking at the NGO sector, the public sector, and the private sector. And with a couple of other issues, they're not as prevalent. So concern with measurement and metrics and regulation, which has been highlighted by our respondents from private sector background. One thing that I would add, this gives us some basic information about the kind of overlap in our research interests. Perhaps at a further point, and perhaps these conversations as these workshops develop, something that we might consider is how these different concepts such as accountability and stakeholder engagement are perhaps applied differently in our different research areas. For example, accountability itself, as Mark Bovins tells us, is a very vague concept and is used in many different ways. So, for example, you might find accountability is often used as an equivalent to reporting, and accountability might just be seen as providing a report or being transparent. Although, as Bovins himself states, transparency in itself is not necessarily accountability, because there needs to be a forum whereby people can engage with the information that's presented. And you can take from that perhaps that might require a form of stakeholder engagement. Others, such as John Roberts, for example, in my area of research, would say that there are different forms of accountability. We might think about accountability in more socializing terms, which require face-to-face interaction. So for somebody like John Roberts, we might want to think about accountability in broader terms, which encompasses stakeholder engagement and an element of reporting. So these different applications of these core concepts are something that we might think about moving forward as this project develops. Also in relation to stakeholder engagement, whether different stakeholders in our distinct research areas are considered more prevalent, or whether their rights are considered in different terms. These are things that we might want to think about moving forward as well. Just to give you a little bit of context to that previous table, I've just selected a couple of illustrative remarks that were shared in the survey that we sent out. So you can see, generally speaking, the overall ideas coming through was that there wasn't that much difference. So whether you're looking at the private or the public sector, there might be some difference in the methods, but the core questions, assumptions, and challenges are shared. And if we look at the third quote, democratic approaches, communication, accountability, these are all relevant to both public and private sector. So democratic approaches might be considered stakeholder engagement, communication might be reporting, and of course accountability itself. The second quote there, I think, links the idea of accountability with this broader idea of stakeholder engagement, or that stakeholder engagement might be part of accountability. That is, accountability is important for both performance measurement and stakeholder engagement. Okay, so today's workshop is going to focus on these kind of common approaches, and in particular, both Nicole and Jan are going to pick up on the theme of reporting. Whilst the second workshop will focus on methodological challenges, I'll just share briefly some of the survey results on methodological challenges just now. Again, perhaps not a huge surprise and fairly consistent across NGO, public and private sector backgrounds. But the two big themes that come off the back of this part of the survey are data availability and validity. And I think this is summed up nicely by these quotes. So availability is an issue, but also external validity. A concern with comparability. So whilst there might be reports out there, because organizations, whether they be in the public or private sector, embed reporting frameworks in different ways or don't apply them consistently, then there's going to be inconsistency in application, and therefore the analysis of reports is complicated as a result. Finally, which pertains to the third workshop, engaging with policy and practice. So when respondents were asked, what challenges do you think you might face in engaging with policymakers or practitioners, or how you might find challenges in using your research to inform policy or practice, the results were a little bit more varied. So perhaps, as you would expect, translating academic research for a practice or policymaker audience was considered a challenge. But some other challenges were identified as well. So public sector respondents seem to identify access to policymakers as a particular difficulty, and also that policymakers or practitioners didn't often understand academic research. So a bit more of a varied picture there, but what I found interesting was where the finger of blame lay, where respondents felt the finger of blame lay. So in terms of challenges of engaging with policymakers or practitioners, some respondents pointed to academic researchers themselves, saying that they're too theoretical and they don't make the effort for the research to be more practically oriented. Whereas some respondents said it was policymakers' fault, that they want simple solutions and they're not prepared to acknowledge the complex issues, especially around sustainability issues, and they just want simple answers and solutions. Okay, so just to kick this workshop off, I just wanted to share some of those survey results with you, because you were kind enough to complete the survey in the preparation for this workshop. But now I am delighted to introduce our two guest speakers. So we have Professor Nicole Darnall, who's going to speak to us about unrealized opportunities on sustainability standards and reporting, and Professor Jan Bevington, who's going to speak to us about accounting, disclosure and reporting. So if you don't mind, we're going to start with Nicole, and then we're going to move to Jan. We're not going to take questions straight after Nicole's presentation, but we're going to wait till both presentations finished, and then we'll take questions then. When it comes to the questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try and identify folks with their hands raised to invite for questions. But you can also use the chat bar as well to put any of your questions there. And both Michael and I will try our best to keep an eye on any questions that you have. Okay, so that's it from me. I'm delighted to pass you over to Nicole.